Hey guys, welcome to Thrive Bites, the official podcast of Dr. Colin Zhu, aka the Chef Doc. On every episode, I talk with health and wellness experts from all over the world, such as doctors, chefs, dietitians, coaches, and many more. And I sit down with them and have casual conversations about plant-based lifestyle, how to elevate our emotional resilience, and what it really means to thrive. And I bring all of this to you. So let's get to this week's episode. Okay, guys, so welcome to another episode of Thrive Bites. I'm your host, Colin Zhu, and thank you for listening on. Today, we have a very, very, very special episode for you guys today. I would love to introduce to you my good friend, pal, and medical colleague, Dr. Tom Spyratos. Say hi to everyone, Tom.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm so glad that you're here today, and thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity.
Yeah. So for those of you who do not know who Dr. Tom is a practicing gastroenterologist out in Olympia Fields, Illinois. He works at a community located 25 miles southwest out of downtown Chicago, and he's very actively involved in the graduate medical education program at Franciscan Health, Olympia Fields, teaching internal medicine residents and gastroenterology fellows. He received his medical degree from the West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine, both of our alma mater. And shout out to them. And he completed his internal medicine residency out in Lutheran General Hospital and his GI fellowship through Midwestern University. And he's board certified in both internal medicine and gastroenterology. So super excited for you to be here. Thank you once again. We are such good buddies and pals. I remember the days where, before I went super plant-based, like 6 years ago, we would, be out in Pittsburgh and, doing our sushi runs from our, rotations and just having, such a ball. I think your favorite roll was like, what was it? Like your spicy tuna hand roll was your favorite roll. Do you remember that?
It's hard to go wrong with that. So yeah, that definitely was one of my favorites.
And your family is originally from Greece, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So tell us like a typical favorite dish, because I remember coming to your place, having to do a rotation and, most people, when they think of Greek food, they'll think of like spinach pie. They'll think of like, lamb. Like, what is your go-to dish?
Yeah. So my go-to dish tends to be a fresh salad. We call it a village salad, and that just includes basically some cucumber, fresh tomato. Sometimes people will add a little bit of lettuce to that, some feta cheese, oil and vinegar, and it's one of the best things you can ever eat. I can't forget the oregano too on that. So
yes, man, I can't forget that too. It's always good fun, and Tom and I go way back, and we always really gather around food and community. That's how usually how our friendship kind of blossomed from there. So, and I'm so happy that he's doing this thing. So the reason why we're making this special episode is today is September 2nd. I can't believe it's September already. And last Friday, we just heard about the recent passing of Chadwick Boseman, who, for those in the audience know as the star of, Black Panther and many, many great Black iconic movie roles like Jackie Robinson, James Brown, Thurgood Marshall. And he, just did these acting roles like, fantastic and stupendously. He was a gifted actor. As I was heartbroken knowing, his passing because he was such a great human being. But what was more surprising to me was of the reason why he passed. And the reason why he passed was from, colon cancer. A lot of people didn't know, a lot of his, a lot of Hollywood didn't know. He was diagnosed stage 3 about 4 years ago in 2016. And, what was more impressive was that he was able to act in these, great movie roles, throughout, his diagnosis. And the reason why, I've asked Tom to be on was, we really wanted to highlight, kind of like a public service announcement with colon cancer, with gut health, and, all things relating to that. And really bring it to light, because it's something that, we could definitely talk about. Definitely, there's a lot of great screening options. And we can talk about, what are the things, increasing, the likelihood of getting this, really terrible condition? And what are the things that, that decrease the likelihood of getting this, disease? And, I think it's a very important thing to talk about. And that's why I have him, come on. And my own personal journey with this, I had a grandmother on my mother's side that passed from this, and I was actually in school. I don't know if you knew this, Tom, but I was actually in school doing the West Virginia, the local 5K chocolate run. In I think it's been more than a few years ago now, but I was doing this 5K when I actually heard that my grandmother was in the hospital, and my parents were actually there to support me.
Oh,
And
wow.
so we weren't there to kind of see her pass, unfortunately. But my takeaway was that her death was quick and painless, but she was diagnosed a lot later in stage for the cancer. So yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to hear of that about your grandmother, and I think a lot of people can relate to a similar story. Colon cancer is very common, unfortunately, and either you personally have been affected, or someone that definitely has been affected by someone with colon cancer. So, thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So let's get down and dirty with it, and let's go over quick facts and figures. Like where have you seen the numbers in terms of where we're at in 2020, or maybe 18 or 19 data, in terms of how does colon cancer rank with the other cancers that kill off Americans? Let's just stick with the United
Sure.
States.
Colon cancer is the second leading reason why people die from cancer. So it's a very big problem here in the United States. It affects roughly 100,000 people every year who are diagnosed with colon cancer, and roughly 50,000 people every year will die from the disease.
Yeah, so that's almost like, if you break down the math, that's almost like 1,000 per week, right? It's crazy, I was looking into this as well, and I was listening to an expert say, almost, if you break that down even further, it's almost like 1 out of 20 people that you will meet, will be diagnosed with it. And, like he says, almost like 1 out of 3 of that, will die. And can we talk about, in terms of you had talked about males and females, does males get this more, or do females, which gender, gets affected more?
So that's a really good question. So in general, we're looking at about 4% of both men and women who will be diagnosed with colon cancer in their lifetime. We consider this number based upon kind of an average risk person, someone who doesn't have any family member in their family history with colon cancer or high risk type of colon polyps.
Mm-hmm.
So the incidence of colon cancer is about 30% higher, though, in men when we compare them to women. However, the lifetime risk is similar, because women tend to live a little bit longer than men. But in general, when we think of gender affecting the incidence, for sure, males have about a 30% higher incidence compared to women.
And for those in the audience that doesn't know what incidence means, that means like the number of new cases that are presented.
Right. The number of new cases within a specific period of time.
Yeah, exactly. I definitely want to highlight the ethnicity, the color background with this. And, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like from what I got was, Africans American, Chadwick Boseman was black, I found that stats were like 20% higher than like Caucasians. Do you find that to be true?
Yes, so demographic studies have shown that the incidence rate for having colon cancer is 20% higher in African Americans compared to Caucasians, at least here in the United States. That is why in the past we recommended that all African Americans who are average risk again start their colon cancer screening at around age 45 as opposed to age 50 for everyone else.
Yeah. And you know what? We're in September, we're in the year of the pandemic. What I found, as we talked about, the past last few months, we did we're in season 3, and at the end of season 2, when the pandemic hit, I started highlighting a lot of COVID related, I started a wellness series with that. And then throughout over time, we just, heard a lot of health disparities. The reason why we're, we're talking about these stats is because, people of color, black and browns, and, they are disproportionately affected, not just with colon cancer, but with like diabetes, heart disease, all these different things. And I don't know, Tom, in relation to colon cancer, why people of color are, more. But in terms of other disease processes, you have health access, contributes to it. You have poor quality, diet contributes to it. And, it's just so many different reasons. And it's just, it really sucks, and this has been hitting the news over and over and over again. And, we need to work hard to kind of, not just, blacks, but like across the board, be able to help as many people as possible. So I don't know from a colon cancer perspective, like, is there a reason why, does the literature say like, why, they're more affected?
Absolutely. The whole goal is to raise awareness and that's a great point. We really don't understand why there's this disparity within the different races. However, we assume at this point that it has something to do with the socioeconomic status and their access to health care, as you mentioned, as well as access to good quality foods, healthy foods, and also, when we're talking about other risks, you bring up a really good point as far as other comorbidities. We're dealing with those who may not have access to good quality foods, healthy, fresh foods. Their risk for getting diabetes or obesity starts to rise, and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah. And, why don't we like break this down? So we talked about, I would say, for those of you who are listening right now, it's kind of like, when you listen about coronavirus, you're like, okay, what can I do for my health? Right. And now, when you have an iconic, person, passing away, you're like, okay, what can I do? And for me, it's like, I always emphasize for those of you who listen to my, podcast, it's like, I overemphasize prevention and wellness. I hit this home. And so with this, I feel like, there's so many great, screening tools with colon cancer. And what's, mind boggling is that we don't actually have that great, screening options for all types of cancers. We don't have that great screening options for like uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer. We have them great for, for colon, right? We have so many great options, and we'll talk about that, rather recently, more with like lung, breasts, and cervical, prostate. It's like, over time. So, for colon, there's so many great stuff. And so, let's break this down. So we talked about age, we talked about gender, we talked about ethnicity. So let's talk about, personal history and family history. What can you tell us in terms of, that increases or decreases the likelihood of getting colon cancer?
So it's really important to, when we're dealing with colon cancer screening, as far as when to begin screening, we always consider their family history. Someone who's at risk for colon cancer is someone who has a first-degree relative with colon cancer, of course. You may also have someone who has at least two second-degree relatives. We would consider those people higher risk for developing colon cancer. The other thing is, even if, let's say, you have a family history, not of colon cancer, but of several polyps or high-risk polyps, meaning they're big polyps, or the type of polyp tends to be considered higher risk, it's also important that, you speak with your primary care doctor, let them know about this family history, because there are certain instances where we would start screening at an earlier age than age 45 or 50. And be a little bit more aggressive about screening you.
Hey guys, we're going to be taking a short break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Thrive Bites. Let's get back to the interview. Yeah, definitely. So for those, just to kind of clarify for those in the audience, a first degree relative is like your mom and dad, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and a second degree would be.
So we're talking aunts, uncles, grandparents, those sorts of members.
I mean, if you guys are curious and because I get this a lot. I don't know about you, Tom, but when I interview a patient and I ask them, can you tell me a little bit more about your family history? A lot of them kind of scratch their heads, right? And then when they come in with a certain issue and you kind of talk about and highlight, okay, tell me, did your family history have this trend? What's going on? So it's important to understand your family tree. And obviously, if you don't know your relatives, you don't know your relatives. But it's important because it's just as important to learn about your own personal health, but it's also important about learning the family patterns that are coming down the line.
That's right. It's very important. And if someone's able to somehow gather that information, then that, all the power to them. It really will make a difference. It can make the difference. Basically, if you think about it, someone who doesn't really know their family history very well, they may be told to start screening at, let's say, age 50. But if they start to understand a little bit more of their family history, and they find out that they have several family members in the past diagnosed with colon cancer, that age can change drastically in which we start. We can talk about 10, 20, maybe even 30 years younger, depending on when that person was diagnosed. So it really does make a very big difference.
Yeah. And, so going with, if we're just talking about the average risk, asymptomatic, without symptoms type of, person, right? For the longest time, a lot of there's a lot of organizations and academic colleges that, we've been historically screening at 50, obviously with different backgrounds we started to do earlier. But have you noticed that in the literature or, over time, we've been having a lot of new cases that are diagnosed earlier? You know what I'm saying? Is there talks to kind of push that screening to earlier in general? Because I was reading the American Cancer Society, they're at 45, others are still sticking at 50. What is the general consensus now?
So you bring up a really good point. When we're dealing recently, back in 2018, the American Cancer Society actually came out with a new recommendation that all Americans who are considered average risk start screening at age 45 instead of age 50. And that has something to do with the trend that we're seeing when we're looking at incidence of colon cancer in different age groups. For example, we have done a really good job over the past few decades in people who are age 50 to 75 in decreasing the incidence of colon cancer. And so we've done a really good job seeing that decline. And however, when we're looking at younger groups under age 50, we're actually seeing the opposite effect. And we're actually seeing a rise in the incidence of colon cancer. We don't really know why. That rise is estimated to be about 2% per year. There are some theories that it may have something to do with our increasingly sedentary type of life, our unfavorable type of diet that's high in processed foods, low in fiber type foods. So there are a lot of, and if you think about it, it's really astonishing that the obesity rate here in the United States is, hovering around 40%. That's nearly half of all Americans considered obese.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
all risk factors when we're talking about, contributing to developing colon cancer.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about diet first, right? And, you talked about the processed foods, you're talking about, the low fiber. Like, how and why does that contribute towards, colon cancer?
Well, there's a lot of theories as far as why it contributes, but let's put this into perspective. More than half of all colon cancers can be attributed to simply lifestyle choices. So, when we're talking about an unhealthy diet, we're talking about increased calories leading to obesity. We know that when people have higher central type of fat deposition or central obesity, that increases the risk for colon cancer. Yeah, we don't really know exactly what part of that diet element contributes to this increased risk, but there's some theories that this there's some these types of foods influence the gut microbiome, which then leads to a change in the inflammatory response within the gut itself. There's also some theories about the insulin that ends up getting oversecreted during these periods. And as a result, you have increased inflammation again. So it all leads down to this thought of increasing inflammation within the body itself. So, that's the unhealthy diet portion. But, don't forget about the poor physical activity. It's recommended by the American Cancer Society that we all get at least about 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week. I don't know about you, but it's pretty difficult to find time to exercise, let alone to make sure that that's moderate to high intensity.
Yeah. I mean, I tell my patients, you know what? Physical activity is not rocket science, right? And I want you to, do something that you enjoy, right? And obviously in a pandemic, we are limited in terms of choices, but I always tell people, you know what, just walk, what I'm saying? Like you have a sidewalk, you have maybe a hiking trail if it's not closed down. You have, maybe a boardwalk if you're if you live in a coastal city, and it's free. You don't need a gym membership. I'm not asking you to run a marathon. I'm not asking you to be like Arnold and lift crazy weights. I just need you to walk, what I'm saying? And we can, toy with this in terms of like increasing intensity. I tell people you need at least a couple of days of resistance, weight resistance, whether it's in form of bands, light weights, just so we can build muscle, and that combination should help. And then also, as we go down the line in terms of, risk factors, there's smoking, right? There's smoking, alcohol, right? That plays into this as well, right?
Yeah, you bring up two other risk factors that are really important to highlight. High amounts of alcohol intake have been associated with increasing risk of colon cancer, as well as smoking. I think the decline in smoking over the past few decades has contributed to this decline in incidence in colon cancer in the 50 to 75 age groups. But now we're dealing with the obesity. So this other risk factor that's starting to kind of creep up. And that's why we're not really seeing as robust of a decline in this age group as we saw in the previous decade.
Yeah, exactly. And, smoking, back in the day, I remember, when the first attorney general made that statement that smoking was bad for you, causes cancer, around 6,000 studies, with studying how smoking affects, your health was already published by then when he made that statement. And it can show, and over time we've done a very good job. But my point is that we can see how powerful the tobacco industry was trying to, fight against this, right? And this is before our time, but doctors smoked, in the lounges, in the doctor's offices, in the hospital, right? And then obviously that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, it's crazy to believe. It's crazy to think about it, but.
Yeah, and if you follow Dr. Neil Barnard, he's from the Physicians Committee of Responsible Medicine, and he said that eating, going back to eating a diet is kind of like the new smoking, and we talked about eating what kinds of foods and the different types that create more of like an inflammatory response. And one thing we didn't hit on was fiber. Fiber, for the average American, because we are more heavy towards a meat predominant, processed, refined, carb type of society, what, we end up doing is that, a lot of animal foods, a lot of animal based foods, doesn't have fiber. And I tell people like fiber is like the roughage. It's kind of like the scrub pad, of what you're cleaning, and, vegetables and fruits, whole grains, they all have fiber. And the average American only eats like 15 grams per day. And, when I recommend plant-based, and other organizations, they recommend 40 plus, and it's super, super important. How does the fiber, from what you understand, in relation to, how does that play in towards like gut health and microbiome and all that stuff?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Our theory of how fiber and whole grains specifically help improve or decrease the risk of being diagnosed with colon cancer. Our theory is that it helps improve transit time. So again, if we go back to the idea of inflammation, or the amount of inflammation that's going on in the body based on what's coming into the body, right? What you're eating, the higher amount of fiber that you take in, the greater speed at which it's removed from the body. And so in theory, you have less inflammation that goes on, or less possibility of the inflammation affecting the body when you eat those whole grains.
Mm-hmm.
Our risk, it's estimated to decrease about 5% for every 30 grams of fiber we take in per day. One of the things I highly recommend at every visit for most of my patients is a high fiber diet. And you'd be surprised at how many GI related type of symptoms improve just by, really working on someone's diet, specifically improving the amount of fiber that they take in. You did mention red meats, processed meats. I know that was a hot topic within the past few years as well. And it's amazing how all of a sudden it gains some attention early on, but then immediately afterwards, within a few months, people stop talking about it. But we do know that the risk of colon cancer is increased by eating more red meats and processed foods, or processed type of meats. So think about it this way: for every 50 grams of processed meats, red meats, or sausages someone consumes, and that's as little as 2 slices of lunch meat. I mean, it's such a small amount, but that increases your risk of colon cancer nearly 20%.
Yeah. I'm so glad you touched on this, because the World Health Organization back around like 2015, they created a task force and to kind of, look at these different types of animal-based foods. And believe it or not, it still shocks me every time I look at this, look at these two categories, is that they classified, red meat to be a group 2A carcinogen. Right. And a carcinogen is something that is, components or the actual entity that actually leads towards cancer producing. And so red meat is group 2A. And then, processed meat is classified as a class 1. Right. And, what surprised me after that was like, what else is a class 1 carcinogen? It's asbestos and smoking.
Wow.
Like those are class 1s. And then you have the WHO classifying processed meats in the same category. And it astounds me how we don't have labeling, warning signs for this, right? And we just eat this nonchalantly, right? And so what are processed meats? Cured meats, bacon, deli meats, hot dog, like anything that's processed, right? We're not talking about like a steak. We're talking about things that are, just manipulated, and cooked, differently, right? A lot of things too that animal-based foods have that are different from plant food is that they have something called heme iron. Heme iron is a pro-oxidant, that is increasing the likelihood for oxidation or oxidative stress. And what that means for the listening audience is kind of like rust to a car. You know what I'm saying? And if you look at, I always bring up this analogy in my past episodes. It's like if you think about your body like a car, that a car eventually rusts out, and so what you put in your mouth, how you live your life, is to kind of delay that as much as possible, right? And so heme iron is one. And they also have something, especially processed meats, like something called nitrites or nitrosamines, right? And there's been a lot of studies that show, associations with increase in cancer, like, for example, stomach cancer. I don't know if Tom, if you can speak to that a little bit, but that's something different with, processed meats as well. Hey guys, we're going to be taking a short break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Thrive Bites. Let's get back to the interview.
Yeah, that's definitely an increased risk of curing meats, high salted type of foods, that sort of thing. Barbecue type foods definitely increases the risk there.
Yeah, and not to mention the saturated fat and the trans fat that comes along with this. And like you said, you bring up a good point with how it's prepared, because when you're grilling, when you're frying something, it increases the AGEs, which is the glycolic end products. Basically, fancy way of saying adding towards that oxidative stress. So, we talked about the risk factors, so let's talk about the screening options, hitting this back to home. What are the available screening options that we have? And, what would you, recommend people that, are curious, that want to talk to their healthcare provider or gastroenterologist or GI provider? Like, where do we start?
Yeah, so I think it's important that everyone just start the conversation with a healthcare provider, whether that's your primary care doctor or someone that you're seeing for any other type of condition that can then lead you to either a GI doctor or someone else to give you these other options that are available. But I want to make sure my goal for today is to really get awareness out there. And make sure that, at least help make people feel more comfortable with the idea of colon cancer screening. Number one, like I said, it's just really being able to start the conversation. If you have questions, please talk to a healthcare provider, whoever that may be, and they'll be able to guide you in the right direction, at least give you some more information about when it might be a good time to start. And then number two, a colon cancer screening doesn't necessarily mean you're going to need a colonoscopy per se. It's an option out there. A colonoscopy is a great tool that we use, but there are some other types of tests, stool-based tests that are also great options. I always say to my patients, the best screening test that is available is the one that actually gets done by the patient. And so as long as we're doing the screening tests that are options for every single person, as long as we're doing them and completing them and following up on them, that's the most important thing.
Yeah. So for me as a family care provider, I talk mostly about the stool test, the annual stool tests and colonoscopies. And I know there's a lot more, back in the day, it was more sigmoidoscopies, right? And then now we have more like DNA tests and, things like that. But my observations over time is that patients have been skittish about like the procedure, right? And what goes down with the procedure. Tell us like the pros and cons with getting the stool test, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, recommended, depending on which age you work with your healthcare provider, starting at which age, but you get this annually with the stool test. The pros and cons to that, what are the steps for that? And then the pros and cons for the scoping.
Yeah, so, I like to break it down into kind of the more invasive type of options and the less invasive type of options. So when we talk about, kind of our quote unquote gold standard, that's your colonoscopy. The pro of the colonoscopy or the benefit is that, it's a great screening option that allows us to visualize the colon wall. But in order to do so, we need to kind of cleanse the bowels. And a lot of people just don't want to have to deal with that type of cleanse. And then the second part is it usually involves some sort of sedation. So it can sometimes be a little bit difficult for people to find, let's say a ride home after the procedure. And try to schedule around other people's schedules, if you will. But it's a great test because not only do we, are we able to visualize the colon wall, we're able to take away or remove polyps or precancerous growths at that point in time. So it's therapeutic at the same time.
Yeah.
As far as, the other options that are available, if someone says, I really don't want to go through anesthesia, and the idea of a colonoscopy I know is not pleasant, but you'd be surprised at how relieved people are afterwards, because we do make sure that people are completely comfortable. They don't remember a thing. They're completely comfortable. They do not have any pain or tenderness down below afterwards. Even if we remove large polyps, they feel, for the most part, great. They may have a little bloating from the air that we instill in the bowel, but usually that bloating is very short-lived. And by the time they really wake up from the anesthesia, that sensation is completely gone. But, that's, as far as the non-invasive type of options that are available, we have other options. And depending on which test you do, for example, if, depending on which test you do will determine the timing of your next colonoscopy or the timing of your next colon cancer screening. So I started by talking about the colonoscopy. Some people ask me, when will I need another one? Well, if you're considered someone average risk and without a family history of colon cancer, asymptomatic, no type of GI symptoms, that sort of thing, and we don't find any polyps, then you don't have to bother with screening for another 10 years. Mm-hmm. But let's say if you have one or two polyps, the timing of your next colonoscopy will be determined based on the type of polyp, the number of polyps, and the size of those polyps. So we really individualize the screening or the surveillance in that instance based on what we find.
Yeah. But for the in-between, so you're referring to like the scoping, right? So the in-between, would you suggest, getting, the stool test in between on an annual basis?
No. So once someone goes through a colonoscopy, the findings of the colonoscopy, again, it's individualized, but the findings on the colonoscopy as well as their family history is kind of taken into account. And that determines the timing of the next procedure the surveillance. So as I mentioned, if someone's average risk without any symptoms, no findings on colonoscopy, again, they don't have to worry about repeating any colonoscopy or any type of colon cancer screening for a minimum of 10 years. So a lot of people like that option because they're busy. They don't want to have to deal with, going to their primary doctor and having to submit stool samples. And I guess that's a good segue into the less invasive type of screening options for patients. There are stool-based tests that look for microscopic amounts of blood in the stool. Most recently, one of the newer tests not only looks for blood, but it also looks for certain proteins or parts of DNA that are shed by large high-risk polyps and colon cancer. And so if any one of those things is identified, it kind of flags it as a positive. So those are options for people that are less invasive than a colonoscopy. But let's say if you choose the stool test route, the immunochemical stool test route, where it's simply looking for blood in the stool, you're looking at needing to repeat that test every single year. If we're talking about the other test, that incorporates the stool DNA, which is known as Cologuard, then if it's negative, you would need to repeat that in 3 years. So it really depends on, what type of test you're doing, which will determine the timing of your next screening.
So let's just say you have a patient, for example, that would opt for the less invasive, the stool test, right? Like, could they go for, that screening period from 50 to 75, for example, just on the stool test? Or would you recommend like, hey, I think it might be a good idea if we throw in a scope, somewhere in there? Like, could they go theoretically from 50 to 75 without having to do a scope? Would you recommend that?
If it's someone who is average risk without any symptoms, then that is an option for them to only have to do annual stool tests. But it's really important, and I emphasize the importance of this. If someone decides to go that route, it's really important not to miss, or not to prolong the tests, the duration between tests. It's very important that every single year that test get done.
Yeah. And we can be so busy in our lives that we can, put it off or forget about it. So, but what's the importance of emphasizing these choices is that, there's many options, right? And we have, enough, knowledge and experience and data, to be able to say like, hey, this works, but we just have to educate the patients, educate and reinforce that relationship between patient and healthcare provider to be able to say like, hey, here are your options. Let's get this done, and review their history, which is a nice segment to, as we close out, like, what are the things that, you would recommend like looking out for? Like, what are the signs and symptoms? We didn't talk about this in the beginning, but like, what are things like, someone was curious, like, I am really distraught with, Chadwick Boseman's death. I know a lot of people that had colon cancer. Like, what are some things I need to look for to be like, hey, this is a red flag. I need to go see my doctor, or, just things to ask them when they see them.
Yeah. So I'm glad you kind of brought us back to the different symptoms that people should be looking for. Typically when we're talking about colon cancer screening, we're thinking of someone who's completely asymptomatic, right? Someone who, based on their age and their family history, requires a screening. But when we deal with symptoms, alarm symptoms that require a diagnostic evaluation, that's completely different. So, for especially the young population under 50, it's really important that if anyone is having rectal bleeding, please don't attribute it to just hemorrhoids. It's very, very important to have that evaluated by a gastroenterologist, or even your primary care doctor. Start the conversation. Let them know how often that the bleeding, you're seeing the bleeding. It's really important to be mindful of maybe changes in your bowel habits whether, if you were regular, let's say, with not having to strain, and all of a sudden, you're going several days without a bowel movement. It's not getting any better. You try to modify your diet. Don't wait months and months to let someone know about that. It's really important that you start that conversation with your primary doctor or other healthcare provider.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because a lot of people, from my experience working with these patients is, they just attribute it to hemorrhoids, basically. It's like, oh, I just ate a bag of, flaming hot Cheetos and, it's bleeding and, I haven't pooped in, a few days. And those are just attributed to that. Young and older. And I'm just like, no, any type of blood, we got to make sure that, we got to do our due diligence and follow through, like you said. So you can't overstate this enough. So I'm really, really glad that you brought that up. So.
Absolutely. And especially now that we're seeing this slow rise in incidence in younger people. In the past, we would just say, less likely, anything dangerous, anything significant, probably hemorrhoids, work on your fiber for several months and let us know. But nowadays, it's really hard for someone to just attribute that rectal bleeding to a simple hemorrhoid. So it really is important that people, get out, talk to your doctors, listen to your bodies, and really kind of start that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And so, as much as, we love Chadwick Boseman and how much he brought to the world, I would hate to, see other people, not actually talk about this and go to their doctor and start that conversation. So, Tom, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise. Any follow-up, finishing thoughts, to give to the audience?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's always a pleasure. It's always great talking to you, Colin. I'm really excited for what you're doing and, the audience you're trying to reach. I think as far as any last minute thoughts, really my suggestion is just to emphasize that, colon cancer is a big problem here in the United States. It's a very common problem. And it's very lethal if caught late. Yeah. So, really start that conversation, listen to your bodies. If something's not right, if you're having abdominal pain or rectal bleeding, or changes in your bowel habits, and it's not going away after a few weeks, it's really important that you reach out and seek medical attention. So,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you again for those last thoughts. Guys, again, this is a special episode for Thrive Bites. Please, as much fun and conversational we tend to get in the previous episodes and over time, the information, comes across as, we want you to be well. We want your family to be well. These are tough times. We're in this together. And but I don't want to overstate, see your doctor and see your healthcare provider and get checked. Health is wealth, and I always emphasize health as priority. So thank you again, guys. This has been another episode of Thrive Bites. If you like this, please subscribe and follow. If you feel like this is of importance to someone else, please share this as well. And we will see you on the next episode. Thank you, everyone. Hey guys, that was another episode of Thrive Bites. If you like that episode, please subscribe and follow for new episodes. And don't forget to rate us on Apple Podcasts.